The sun dipped low behind the neatly trimmed hedges and freshly painted fences of Willow Creek, the kind of neighborhood that looked like it belonged in a magazine spread. Every house was pristine, every lawn immaculately mowed, and every neighbor appeared to smile politely as they passed by. To an outsider, Willow Creek was the perfect suburban haven. Calm, orderly, and safe, but beneath the surface, attention crackled quietly, like static on a radio. Waiting for someone to turn the dial, Alex watched from the porch swing of her modest home as Karen stepped out of her bright red SUV, clutching a clipboard as she surveyed the street. Karen was the neighborhood's unofficial watchdog, a self-appointed guardian of HOA rules who took her job a little too seriously. Most neighbors tolerated her with forced smiles and polite nods, but Alex had learned to watch her more closely. There was something about Karen's sharp eyes and tight-lipped smile that hinted at a simmering frustration just below the surface. That evening, as the last glow of daylight faded, Alex noticed Karen's gaze fixed on the Johnsons' house, the neighbors next door. The Johnsons were relatively new, having moved in just a few months ago. Quiet and friendly, they kept mostly to themselves, but Karen seemed to view their every move with suspicion. Tonight, Karen's stare was different, intense, almost predatory. Alex's curiosity piqued. Something was brewing. Karen slowly paced along the sidewalk, stopping in front of the Johnsons' gate. She tilted her head, eyes narrowing as she scanned the yard, as if expecting to find something out of place. The porch light flickered on, and a shadow moved behind the curtain. Karen's expression hardened. From across the street, Alex could see the way Karen pulled out her phone and started typing rapidly. Her fingers didn't tremble. They moved with purpose, as if rehearsed many times before. Alex's stomach tightened. Karen was calling someone. But who? And why now? The evening air grew colder, the streetlights casting long shadows across the manicured lawns. The Johnsons' front door opened briefly, revealing a man in his late 30s, talking quietly on the phone. He glanced around nervously before closing the door. Karen's eyes followed him, a flicker of satisfaction crossing her face. Alex felt a knot of unease twist in her gut. Was Karen seeing something she wasn't? Or was this just another chapter in her long history of making mountains out of molehills? No one had seen anything wrong in Willow Creek for years, not in the way Karen seemed to suggest. But tonight, the atmosphere was different. There was a crack in the facade. As Alex sat back, the screen of her phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. Did you see Karen outside the Johnsons? Something's about to happen. Her heart jumped. Who was watching? And what were they waiting for? She glanced once more at Karen, still standing rigid by the Johnsons' gate. Eyes sharp and unblinking. The perfect neighborhood was anything but. Karen's phone buzzed in her hand. As she stood by the Johnsons' gate, the glow from the screen illuminating her sharp features in the growing darkness, she stared at the message from the unknown number and then back toward the house next door. Something wasn't right. She could feel it in her bones. She wasn't the kind of person to jump to conclusions lightly. Over the years, she'd earned a reputation in Willow Creek for being exacting, maybe even a little ruthless when it came to enforcing the HOA rules. But tonight felt different. This wasn't about a crooked mailbox or an illegal fence. No, this was deeper, something dangerous. A few nights ago, Karen had noticed strange shadows flickering inside the Johnsons' living room, even when the house was supposed to be empty. Last week, she saw unfamiliar cars parked in their driveway long after midnight, and now, the odd phone call, the secretive glances. It was as if the Johnsons were hiding something that could threaten the neighborhood's fragile peace. Her fingers tightened around the phone She dialed 911. "This is Karen Reynolds from Willow Creek. I'm reporting suspicious activity at my neighbor's house," she said firmly when the operator answered. "There's something going on there. I'm not sure what, but it feels wrong. I think it might be dangerous." The operator's voice was calm, but professional. "Can you describe the activity, ma'am?" Karen glanced back at the Johnsons' house, where the curtains remained tightly drawn. "I've seen people coming and going at all hours. Tonight, there was a strange package left on their porch. I don't know if it's illegal, but it looked out of place." The operator assured her that officers would be dispatched immediately. Karen ended the call, her heart pounding. She had to do what was right, no matter what anyone thought. The safety of Willow Creek came first. Minutes later, flashing red and blue lights illuminated the quiet street. 2 officers stepped out of their squad car and approached Karen with measured expressions. "Mrs. Reynolds?" one officer asked, his tone polite but cautious. "Yes, that's me," Karen replied, trying to keep her voice steady. They asked her to recount the details of her concerns. Karen described the late-night visitors, the package, the strange behavior. The officers nodded, but exchanged subtle glances that made her uneasy. Walking over to the Johnsons' front door, one officer knocked firmly. When no one answered, they circled the house, shining flashlights into windows and scanning the yard. Karen watched closely, hoping they'd find proof of her suspicions. But then, the officers returned, faces unreadable. "Mrs. Reynolds," the senior officer began, "we spoke with your neighbors. They say everything is normal. Just a few late nights at work and some personal deliveries. The package you mentioned was from a legitimate courier service." Karen's stomach sank. "But what about the strange cars, the shadows, the noises?" The officer hesitated. "Sometimes people's imaginations can play tricks on them, especially in quiet neighborhoods like this." Karen opened her mouth to argue, but stopped. A pang of doubt crept in. Before she could say more, one officer glanced sharply at her and added, "We've noticed you've called in several complaints over the past few months. While it's important to keep the neighborhood safe, we also have to be mindful of emergency resources." Karen's face flushed with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. The tables were turning, and she could feel the weight of suspicion pressing down on her. As the officers packed up and left, Karen stood alone on the sidewalk, staring at the Johnsons' darkened house. Had she made a mistake? Was she just the neighborhood busybody no one wanted to admit they feared? The night air felt colder now, heavier, and somewhere inside that quiet house, secrets waited patiently to be uncovered. The police cruisers retreated down the street, their flashing lights dissolving into the night. Karen stood rigid on the sidewalk, her heart pounding, her breath shallow. She felt the eyes of the neighborhood, real or imagined, burning into her back. Whispers would spread. Questions would arise. Was she a protector or a nuisance? Tonight had changed everything. Inside the Johnsons' home, shadows danced eerily against the walls. Mark Johnson, the man Karen had watched earlier, sat silently in the dim living room, phone pressed tightly to his ear. His voice was low, urgent. "They're snooping again," he hissed. "I don't know how much longer we can keep this quiet." On the other end, a muffled response. "Stay calm, we'll handle it." Mark ended the call and glanced nervously at the front door. He knew Karen had called the police, but he wasn't worried about her. Not yet. What concerned him was what the officers might discover if they looked too closely. Minutes later, a different patrol car arrived, its engine purring softly as it rolled to a stop near the curb. 2 officers stepped out, one younger, eager, the other older, more cautious. They approached the Johnsons' door with professionalism, but a hint of skepticism. Knocking sharply, they waited. No answer. Officer Jensen pulled out a radio. "Dispatch, we're at the Johnson residence." No response at the door. The older officer, Sergeant Daniels, motioned for Jensen to check the perimeter. Jensen's flashlight beam swept over the yard, lingering briefly on a cluster of bushes. Near the back fence, something glinted in the beam's path. Jensen crouched down and reached into the shrubbery. His hand emerged clutching a small unmarked package, wrapped in plain brown paper. "What do you think this is?" Jensen asked, holding it up. Sergeant Daniels frowned. "Could be anything, but given the call, we need to be cautious." Jensen carefully opened the package, revealing a stack of odd-looking electronic devices, small cameras, wires, and what looked like GPS trackers. Both officers exchanged a glance heavier than words. Inside, the front door suddenly creaked open. Startling them, Mark Johnson appeared, face pale but composed. "Officers," Mark said calmly. "What brings you here at this hour?" Jensen held up the package. "We found this in your bushes. Care to explain?" Mark's eyes flickered with something unreadable. "Those are part of a home security system I'm testing. Nothing illegal." Daniels raised an eyebrow. "Testing? In the bushes?" Mark nodded. "Yes. I prefer to keep the cameras discreet to monitor potential trespassers." The officers weren't convinced, but decided to let it go for now. They advised Mark to secure the devices properly and reminded him of the HOA's rules about visible property modifications. Karen, still watching from her porch, saw the officers leave without any citations. She felt her stomach twist. Was this all a misunderstanding? Or was there something more the officers weren't telling her? Later that night, Jensen and Daniels sat in their patrol car, reviewing notes. Karen's call was suspicious. Jensen said, scrolling through his phone. "She's made several reports recently, none of which led to anything." Daniels looked thoughtful. "But these devices, not something you see every day in this neighborhood." Jensen nodded slowly. "Maybe Karen was onto something, but she's not exactly reliable." Daniels sighed. "We should keep an eye on both of them." Back on the street, Karen sat alone on her porch swing, staring into the Johnsons' darkened windows. The package, the devices, the late-night visitors. Pieces of a puzzle she was desperate to solve. But tonight had changed everything. The police had come, seen, and left with more questions than answers. And Karen was no longer just the worried neighbor. She was the prime suspect in her own investigation. Karen's confidence wavered as the days passed. The officer's polite skepticism had morphed into a quiet judgment that seemed to shadow her every step. At the next HOA meeting, she felt the eyes of her neighbors burning into her back like 1,000 silent accusations. Whispers followed her down the hallways. Polite nods were replaced by curt avoidance. Karen had called 911 on the Johnsons, sure she was protecting the neighborhood from an unknown threat. Instead, she found herself isolated, viewed as a troublemaker with a penchant for paranoia. But what stung the most was the way the police now treated her, as if she were the problem. It began with a phone call from Officer Jensen, the younger cop who'd responded to her call. "Mrs. Reynolds," he said cautiously, "we need to talk about the reports you've made. Multiple calls for incidents that didn't pan out." Karen bristled, but forced herself to listen. "We understand you want to keep the neighborhood safe," Jensen continued, "but emergency services are for real emergencies. Repeated false alarms can have serious consequences." Karen clenched her fists, the sting of his words sharp. "I wasn't making false alarms. Something's wrong with the Johnsons." Jensen sighed. "Maybe, but so far we haven't seen proof. You might want to consider cooling things down." The words hit Karen like a blow. The next day, the HOA President Mr. Whitaker invited Karen for a private conversation. Karen, he began, his voice low and measured. There's concern about your behavior. People say you're overreacting. The police aren't exactly on your side anymore. Karen's face flushed with anger and humiliation. I'm trying to protect this community. We know, Whitaker said. But this isn't the way. We need harmony, not suspicion. Maybe it's time to take a step back. Karen left the meeting feeling like a stranger in her own neighborhood, but she refused to give up. That night, Karen reviewed her notes and photos she'd taken of the Johnsons. Over the past weeks, she noticed a pattern: late-night comings and goings, packages, whispered conversations through partially open windows. Something was definitely off. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from the anonymous number. It read, "Meet me. I have information. Midnight, Willow Park." Karen's heart pounded. Was this a trap? Or the break she needed? At midnight, Karen stood in the shadowed corners of Willow Park, the cold air biting at her skin. A figure approached. Tall, cloaked in a hoodie, face obscured. "You're the one causing all the fuss," the stranger whispered, voice low and urgent. "But you're not crazy. The Johnsons? They're hiding something dangerous." Karen leaned in, desperate for answers. They're involved in something big. Illegal shipments, smuggling, the cameras. They're part of a cover-up. Before Karen could respond, the stranger's phone rang sharply. Glancing at the screen, their face paled. "They know you're asking questions," the stranger warned. "Be careful. You might be next." And with that, they melted into the night. Karen's breath came fast. Her world had shifted again, this time, deeper into danger. The line between victim and villain blurred, and the neighbors who once dismissed her as a busybody might soon wish she'd never spoken up at all. By morning, the neighborhood was buzzing, not with the usual small talk about garden parties or weekend barbecues, but with hushed rumors and suspicious glances. The moment Karen arrived at the local coffee shop, she felt it. The weight of hundreds of eyes silently judging her. Conversations hushed. As she passed by, snippets of whispers floated on the breeze. That Karen, always stirring the pot, calling the cops on her neighbors. Over what exactly? She's making us all look bad. Karen's chest tightened. She had never been one to care about gossip. But this felt different. This was something darker. A collective turning of the community against her. She met Alex's eyes across the room. Alex, usually friendly, now looked conflicted, hesitant. It was clear the divide had grown. Some sided with Karen, believing her warnings, while others thought she was simply paranoid. A troublemaker disrupting the peace. Karen pushed back the uneasy feelings and focused on the bigger threat, the Johnsons. They knew the neighborhood's facade was cracking, but no one wanted to confront the truth. Later that day, Karen sat on her porch when she noticed a cluster of neighbors gathered nearby. Their quiet conversation carried on the wind. "I heard the police think Karen's just making things up," one woman said. "But what if there's more to it? Her history with the HOA is complicated." Another responded, "She's obsessed. But maybe she's right." A chill ran down Karen's spine. She wasn't alone, but neither was she truly supported. That evening, Karen's phone buzzed with another anonymous text. "They're watching. Don't trust anyone." Panic flickered through her, but she masked it with determination. She needed allies. Karen decided to reach out to Alex. Their meeting was tense. Alex, usually calm and collected, leaned forward. "Karen, I don't want to see you get hurt. This has become bigger than us." Karen nodded. "I know, but if I don't act, who will? Something's wrong with the Johnsons, and the police won't listen. Alex hesitated. There are rumors. Things people don't say out loud. Property disputes, late-night arguments, unexplained deliveries. But no one wants to get involved. Karen's eyes narrowed. Then we'll get involved. Together, that night. Under the dim glow of her kitchen light, Karen reviewed every detail she had collected. Photos, messages, overheard conversations, pieces of a puzzle that didn't quite fit, yet formed a troubling picture. Suddenly her phone rang, a number she didn't recognize. Karen, a distorted voice whispered. Stop digging! You don't know what you're dealing with. The line went dead. Fear settled in her chest. Cold and unrelenting. The warnings were real. The neighborhood's whispers had turned to threats. Karen realized the stakes were higher than she'd imagined. She was no longer just a concerned homeowner. She was a target. The next morning, Karen woke to a neighborhood that felt less like home and more like a battleground. The air was thick with suspicion, and every glance from a passerby felt like a challenge. Even familiar faces seemed distant, shadows flickering behind polite smiles. Determined to uncover the truth, Karen sought out Alex. Together, they walked to the Johnsons' house, stopping a respectful distance from the neatly kept lawn. I don't trust them, Karen whispered. Not after what I've seen. Alex nodded slowly. There's more here than just strange packages and late-night visits. I did some digging. Nothing illegal, but some odd property disputes from a few years back. Karen and Mr. Johnson didn't part on good terms. Karen's eyes narrowed. That explains a lot. The story went deeper than she'd realized. Years ago, the Johnsons had purchased their home amid heated disagreement with Karen and her family. Boundaries were disputed, trees uprooted, fences moved without permission, bitter words exchanged behind closed doors. Legal threats whispered in the corridors of HOA meetings. The old wounds hadn't healed. If anything, they festered beneath the community's carefully maintained surface. Karen realized this history explained the neighbors' animosity toward her. It wasn't just about her recent 911 call. It was personal. That afternoon, Karen confronted a neighbor who had avoided her for weeks. Why won't you talk to me? Karen asked quietly. The neighbor looked away, hesitating. People don't forget. You and the Johnsons. Your feud made things ugly. We just want peace. Karen swallowed the bitterness rising in her throat. She wanted peace too. But at what cost? Meanwhile, the Johnsons kept their secrets well hidden. Mark Johnson's calm exterior, cracked only in private, where whispered phone calls hinted at bigger dangers. The electronic devices found in the bushes were only a fraction of what lay beneath the surface. Karen and Alex found themselves caught in a web of old grudges and new fears, unsure who to trust. The anonymous messages continued, warning Karen to back off. You're playing a dangerous game, one text read, but Karen's resolve hardened. This wasn't just about HOA rules or property lines anymore. It was about survival. One evening, Karen discovered a hidden folder on her computer. Emails between the Johnsons and unknown contacts. The messages hinted at illegal dealings, possibly smuggling or worse. The evidence was circumstantial, but chilling. When Karen shared her findings with Alex, they both understood. This went far beyond neighborhood disputes. They had stumbled onto something bigger, something dangerous. The line between friend and foe blurred. The neighborhood that once seemed idyllic was a stage for secrets, lies, and silent battles. Karen knew one thing for certain. She couldn't stop now, not when the truth was this close. The days that followed felt like walking through a fog of unease. Karen's every move was shadowed by the growing weight of paranoia, but she refused to back down. The truth was no longer just a distant idea. It was an urgent reality, pressing closer with every passing hour. Karen and Alex met in secret at the local library, poring over the digital evidence Karen had uncovered. The emails, coded and cryptic, pointed to shipments crossing state lines, untraceable transactions, and veiled threats. It wasn't just smuggling. It was something far darker. "We're in way over our heads," Alex whispered, eyes wide with fear. "If this is true, the Johnsons are involved in something serious, maybe dangerous." Karen nodded grimly. "That's why the police don't want to listen. Maybe they're compromised." The room seemed to close in around them as Karen pulled out her phone. She was about to dial 911 again when a notification popped up. A surveillance alert from her own home. Security system. Her blood ran cold. Through the grainy camera feed, Karen saw a shadowy figure lurking near her front door. The figure moved cautiously, almost methodically, before retreating into the darkness. Whoever it was had been watching her. Fear mingled with determination. Karen wasn't just a worried neighbor anymore. She was a target. The next day, she reported the incident to Officer Jensen, who listened carefully, but with an edge of skepticism. "Mrs. Reynolds, we'll increase patrols," he said. "But I advise you to be cautious. You don't want to provoke anyone." Karen clenched her jaw. Provocation wasn't her goal. Survival was. As the days passed, Karen noticed subtle changes. Tires screeched away when she stepped outside. Unfamiliar cars idled nearby, and whispered voices seemed to follow her wherever she went. One evening, Karen found a note slipped under her door. "Stop digging or else." Her heart pounded, but she refused to be intimidated. Determined, she confronted Mark Johnson while he was out tending his garden. His smile was calm, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. "Why are you hiding things, Mark?" Karen demanded. "What are you really doing here?" Mark's expression didn't waver. "Karen, you're meddling where you don't belong. This isn't your fight." "It is, when it threatens everyone here," she shot back. He leaned in, voice low and dangerous. "Be careful. Some truths are better left buried." That night, Karen lay awake, the weight of his words pressing down like a physical force. She had reached a breaking point. The community she'd fought to protect now felt alien, hostile. The lines between friend and enemy blurred beyond recognition, yet, beneath the threat and fear, a flicker of hope remained. Karen knew one thing. She had uncovered something no one else dared to face, and now there was no turning back. The night was thick with silence, broken only by the distant hum of the streetlights. Karen sat at her kitchen table, the scattered papers, and photos glowing faintly under the soft lamplight. The weight of the past weeks pressed heavily on her shoulders, but the fire inside refused to die out. Suddenly, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Meet me at the old community center. Midnight, alone." Despite every instinct screaming at her to ignore it, Karen knew this was the moment she'd been waiting for. The moment when the tangled web might finally start to unravel. At midnight, wrapped in a dark coat, Karen approached the abandoned community center, its windows boarded and its once cheerful facade worn by time. She paused, heart pounding, then stepped inside. The dim interior was empty, except for a lone figure waiting in the shadows. "Who are you?" Karen demanded, voice steady, despite the adrenaline. The figure stepped forward. A woman, mid-40s, familiar yet unexpected. "It's me, Susan," the woman said quietly. Karen's eyes widened. Susan, a neighbor from the opposite end of the street, had always kept to herself. Quiet, unobtrusive. Nothing like Karen's fiery spirit. But now, Susan looked different, wary, guarded, carrying secrets. "I've been watching," Susan continued. "And I know what's happening with the Johnsons." Karen's breath caught. "Why didn't you say anything?" Susan shook her head. "Because I'm involved, but not in the way you think." She explained that the Johnsons had been coerced, trapped in a web of threats and debts that stretched beyond Willow Creek. Susan herself had once been part of their operation, working reluctantly, forced by dangerous people who still controlled the strings. "I wanted out," Susan confessed. "I've been gathering evidence, waiting for the right moment to expose them, and those who protect them." Karen felt the room shift, the pieces falling into place. The police's dismissiveness, the coded emails, the surveillance devices, all part of a much larger, more sinister game. "We need to act fast," Susan said, handing Karen a USB drive. "This has everything. Names, transactions, plans. Enough to bring the whole thing down." But as they spoke, a noise echoed from outside. The crunch of footsteps on gravel. Susan's eyes darkened. "They found us." Before Karen could react, the door burst open and two shadowy figures appeared, blocking their escape. Karen's mind raced. Fear threatened to overwhelm her, but she held firm. In a sudden burst of courage, she grabbed Susan's arm and darted toward a side exit. The figures closed behind. They stumbled out into the night, heart pounding, the cool air a jolt to their senses. Running blindly through the neighborhood's back alleys, they finally reached Karen's house, slamming the door behind them. Breathless and shaken, Susan whispered, "They won't stop until they silence us." Karen nodded. "Then we won't let them." Together, they contacted a trusted reporter, sharing the evidence anonymously, setting in motion a chain of events that would expose the corruption lurking beneath Willow Creek's peaceful surface. In the days that followed, police investigations were reignited, arrests were made, and the neighborhood slowly began to heal. Karen, once the outcast, was finally seen as the guardian she'd always been. And the Johnsons? Their secrets had been their downfall. As the community came together, Karen realized the truth she had fought for wasn't just about rules or property. It was about justice, courage, and the unbreakable strength of standing up when no one else would. The whispers of suspicion faded, replaced by gratitude, and Karen, once isolated, found herself embraced by the very neighborhood she had fought so hard to protect.